Snow fell the way it does in old towns that cling to the edge of the prairie, slow and steady, as if the sky itself had grown tired and decided to lay down and rest. On Christmas Eve, the street was quiet except for the wind slipping between wooden buildings and the distant jingle of a harness bell. Lantern light spilled from windows, warm and golden, promising supper and laughter to those who belonged somewhere. For those who did not, the cold felt sharper and the night felt longer. She stood just beyond the glow of that light. Her boots thin, her fingers numb, her stomach hollow as a church on a weekday. The journey had taken more from her than she had known how to give. Letters had painted the land as wide and kind, a place where work was honest and a woman could begin again. The words had smelled of ink and hope. The truth smelled of snow, horsesweat, and disappointment. She had arrived with a small bag, a faded coat, and the weight of a promise that had already begun to crumble. She had been called a mail-order bride by the women who glanced at her and looked away. The term had followed her from the train platform to the boarding house steps. It sounded like something that could be folded and stamped, neat and tidy. Nothing about her felt neat now. Her supper had been meant to come later, after she met the man who had written to her for nearly a year, but the man had not come. The boarding house keeper had shaken her head and said there was no credit tonight, not on Christmas Eve. A woman needed a husband or money, and she had neither. Across the street, a window glowed brighter than the rest. Inside, a long counter held plates piled high with meat and potatoes, steam rising like a blessing. Men laughed in low voices, their coats dusted with snow, their faces red from the cold, and something stronger. At one table near the window sat a cowboy, his hat tipped back, his elbows resting easy, as if the world had never pressed down on his shoulders. He ate slow, cutting his food with care, like a man who knew the value of a warm meal. She told herself not to look. Looking made the hunger louder. Still, her eyes betrayed her, drawn to the simple act of someone eating without fear of tomorrow. She thought of the last letter she had read by candlelight, how it promised a home and a shared table. She thought of her mother's voice, long gone, telling her that Christmas was a night when miracles sometimes slipped through the cracks. The wind pushed her closer to the window before she could argue with herself. Snow gathered in her hair and along the hem of her dress. Her hand tightened around the strap of her bag, the leather stiff with age. She wondered how she must look from inside. A stranger, a woman with too much road in her eyes. A poor bride without a groom, standing on Christmas Eve with no supper to claim. The cowboy noticed her then. It was not the kind of look that weighs a woman like goods. It was a look of pause, of curiosity, edged with something softer. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. For a moment, the room behind him faded, and there was only the glass between them, spotted with melting snow. He could have looked away. Most men did. Instead, he set his fork down and leaned closer to the window, studying her face as if it were a letter he was trying to read, without knowing all the words. She felt heat rise to her cheeks and turned slightly, ashamed of her need. She had learnt early that hunger was a private thing. You carried it quietly and did not ask the world to fix it. The bell over the door jingled as someone left, letting a burst of warmth escape. It wrapped around her for a breath and then was gone. Her stomach tightened in protest. Inside, the cowboy wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and said something to the man beside him. The words were lost to the glass, but the tone was calm, steady. He pushed his plate a little to the side, not finished, not in a hurry. He stood, tall enough that the lamplight caught the lines of his coat and the wear on his boots. He moved with the ease of someone used to making space for himself in crowded places. She told herself to leave. Pride tugged at her. Thin but stubborn, she turned away, stepping back into the darker part of the street. Snow crunched under her feet, loud in the quiet. That was when the door opened behind her. The warmth spilled out again, fuller this time, carrying the smell of food and coffee. A shadow fell across the snow at her feet. She did not turn at once. She had learned caution on the road. When she finally faced him, she kept her chin level, her eyes steady, the way women did when they needed to be brave. He did not smile wide or speak fast. His voice, when it came, was low and even, like a creak under ice. He said it was a cold night to be standing alone. He said there was more food than he could finish. He said it would be a shame to let it go to waste, especially on Christmas Eve. She searched his face for a catch. There was none she could see, only a quiet offering that asked nothing aloud. Still, she hesitated. Accepting meant admitting how far she had fallen from the promise she had chased across miles of rail and dust. Accepting meant stepping into the light where others could see her for what she was. He waited. Snow settled on his hat brim. The bell behind him chimed again as another man stepped out, nodding to him and glancing at her with mild interest before moving on. The world did not stop for their small moment. That made it feel safer. She nodded once. The motion felt heavier than it should have. He held the door open and gestured her inside, not touching her, not rushing her. The room wrapped around her like a forgotten song, heat soaked into her bones. Voices blended into a hum. Someone laughed at a joke she did not hear. They sat at the table by the window. The plate was set between them, steam rising. He pushed it closer to her, then leaned back, giving her space. She took a bite, small at first, then another. The food tasted like relief. Her hands stopped shaking. For a moment, the world narrowed to the simple act of eating and breathing. They spoke little. He asked where she had come from, not prying, just enough to place her on his map of the world. She answered with care. She did not tell him everything. She did not tell him about the letters folded and worn, or the man who had failed to meet her train. Some truths needed time to thaw. Outside, the snow thickened. The street grew quieter. Christmas Eve pressed close to midnight. Somewhere a church bell would soon ring. She wondered what morning would bring. A town could be kind for an hour and hard for a lifetime. She wondered what he expected in return for the meal he had shared, and whether kindness could exist without a ledger. He watched her as she ate, not with hunger of his own, but with a thoughtful look, as if he were weighing a choice he had not planned to face tonight. When she finished, she thanked him, her voice soft but steady. She reached for her bag, meaning to step back into the cold with a full stomach and no answers. He stopped her with a quiet word. Outside, the wind rattled the window. Inside, the lamp flickered. He leaned forward, elbows on the table now, the plate between them like a small bridge. He said there was a spare room where he was staying. He said the night was no place for a woman alone. He said the road had a way of taking more than it gave. Her heart thudded, not with fear alone, but with the weight of a choice that felt too big for one night. Christmas Eve had given her a meal, but it had also laid a question at her feet. As the bell began to toll in the distance and the snow piled higher against the glass, she looked at the man across from her and wondered which promise would break next. She did not answer him right away. The room seemed to hold its breath, even though the men at the other tables kept talking and laughing. Her fingers curled around the strap of her bag again, the leather warm now instead of stiff. A spare room meant walls, a bed, a door that closed. It also meant trust, and trust had been costly on the road west. She looked at the window, at the snow pressed flat against the glass, and then back at him. His eyes did not hurry her. She asked where the room was. Her voice surprised her by sounding steady. He said it was above the livery, clean and plain, with a stove that worked if you fed it right. He said the owner owed him a favor from last spring when a horse went lame at the worst possible time. He did not say anything more. He did not say what he expected. That silence weighed more than promises. She nodded again. Smaller this time. They rose from the table. He paid the bill without flourish, setting coins down as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. When they stepped back into the street, the cold bit again, but she felt it less. They walked side by side, not close enough to touch. The town looked different now, less like a test and more like a place that might remember her footprints by morning. As they walked, she studied the way he moved. He walked like a man used to long days, his shoulders easy, his steps measured. The brim of his hat shielded his eyes from the snow, but she could tell when he glanced her way, checking her pace. He did not ask questions that night. He let the street speak for him, the creak of signboards, the muffled sound of a piano somewhere far off. The stairs to the room were narrow and steep. He went first, lighting a lamp and holding it high so she could see where to place her feet. The room itself was just as he had said. A bed with a clean quilt, a small table, a chair with one loose rung, and a stove that ticked softly as it cooled. It smelled faintly of hay and soap. He set the lamp down and stepped back. He told her she could have the room for the night. He said they could talk more in the morning when daylight made things clearer. He paused at the door, then added that Christmas morning had a way of changing how people saw the world. He left then, pulling the door shut behind him. The latch clicked, a small sound that echoed in the quiet. She stood alone, listening to the wind and the distant bells. She set her bag on the table and sat on the edge of the bed. The quilt was rough but clean. She pressed her palms into it, grounding herself. She had slept in worse places. She had slept sitting up, clutching her bag, while the train rocked her dreams into knots. She opened the bag and took out the letters, tied with a faded ribbon. She did not untie them. She had read them enough. The words had promised steadiness, a man who wanted a partner, not a servant. The handwriting had been careful, almost shy. Somewhere between the last letter and tonight, something had gone wrong. She wondered if the man had changed his mind or if the town had swallowed him whole. She lay back and stared at the ceiling, watching shadows move as the lamp flickered. Her stomach was full, but her thoughts were not quiet. The cowboy's offer replayed in her mind. A spare room was one thing, morning was another. Morning asked for plans, for explanations. Morning asked who you were and why you had come. Sleep came in pieces. She dreamed of tables and plates sliding away just as she reached for them. She dreamed of a door that would not open, no matter how hard she pushed. When she woke, the room was pale with early light. The snow had stopped. The town felt hushed, as if it were waiting. She washed her face at the basin and smoothed her hair as best she could. She told herself she would leave early, thank him again, and find work. There was always work if you looked hard enough. Kitchens needed hands, shops needed sweeping. Pride could be folded away like a letter. Downstairs, the livery smelled of hay and coffee. He was there, already up, speaking to the owner in low tones. When he saw her, he tipped his hat and finished his sentence. The owner nodded and went back to his chores. He offered her coffee, pouring it from a dented pot. She wrapped her hands around the cup and felt it warm her from the inside. They sat on overturned crates, the morning light slanting through the open door. He asked about her journey then, not pressing, just letting her set the edges of the story. She told him about the train, about the cold nights and the towns that all looked the same after a while. She told him she had come to marry and that the man had not met her. She did not say his name, saying it felt like giving it power. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once. He said the land made promises it could not keep. He said he had learned that early. He told her he had come west young, chasing work and a bit of space. He had found both, and had lost them again more than once. He did not say what he had lost. Some things did not need to be named to be understood. Outside, a bell rang, calling folks to church. The sound carried over the snow, clear and bright. She felt a tug in her chest, a memory of hymns and candles. He asked if she planned to go. She shook her head. Church felt too close to hope, and hope felt fragile. They spoke of practical things instead. He said there might be work at the hotel, that the cook had a temper but paid fair. He said the town was not unkind, but it remembered mistakes. She asked about the spare room, about how long she could stay. He said they could talk to the owner, that favors were meant to be used. As the morning wore on, people passed by, nodding to him, glancing at her with curiosity. She felt the weight of their looks, the questions they did not ask. She was aware of how she must appear, a woman attached to him by circumstance. That attachment could become a chain or a lifeline, depending on how the town chose to see it. They walked together toward the hotel, keeping a careful distance. The street had changed with daylight. Children darted between adults, their cheeks red, their laughter sharp. A woman stood in a doorway, calling greetings. The piano played again, softer this time. Christmas morning had arrived, carrying its mix of mercy and judgment. At the hotel, the cook eyed her up and down and said she could use help just for the day. She tied on an apron and went to work, grateful for the rhythm of chopping and stirring. He did not stay. He tipped his hat and said he would check back later. She watched him go, a strange ache settling in her chest. She had known him less than a night, yet his absence felt louder than his presence. The kitchen was hot and loud. She lost herself in the work, let in the hours pass. Now and then she caught herself thinking of the spare room, of the way he had spoken without pushing. She wondered what kind of man shared his plate on Christmas Eve and then asked nothing in return. She wondered what kind of trouble followed a kindness like that. By afternoon, snow clouds gathered again. The cook paid her in coins and a small sack of bread. She stepped back into the street, the sky heavy overhead. She did not know where she would sleep that night. The spare room was an option, but options carried costs. She walked toward the livery, her steps slow. He was there again, brushing down a horse. He looked up and smiled, a small thing, but it warmed her more than the stove had. He asked how the work went. She told him. He asked about her plans. She hesitated, feeling the familiar pull between pride and need. Before she could answer, a man approached, his coat fine, his eyes sharp. He looked from her to the cowboy and back again. He asked if she was the woman who had arrived on the evening train, the one expected by a certain household. The words landed like stones. The cowboy straightened, his hand still on the horse's neck. He said she was with him at the moment. The man's mouth tightened. He said there had been a misunderstanding, that things were complicated. He said it would be best if she came along to speak with someone who had questions. Snow began to fall again, light at first, then thicker. She felt the ground shift beneath her. The town that had seemed quiet now showed its edges. She looked at the cowboy, searching his face. He met her gaze, steady and unreadable. The bells began to ring again, calling the town together, as if Christmas itself had decided to watch what would happen next. The man with the sharp eyes did not raise his voice, but there was authority in the way he stood, as if the street belonged to him. Snow clung to his coat, melting into dark patches that marked time passing. She felt suddenly visible, like a mark on clean paper. People slowed as they passed, curiosity tugging at them. Christmas had a way of making private matters public. She asked who he was speaking for. Her voice stayed level, though her heart beat faster. He said he represented a household on the north end of town, a place with a good roof and a good name. He said a letter had been sent, arrangements made. He said misunderstandings happened, but they could be corrected if everyone acted sensibly. The cowboy shifted his weight, the horse beside him flicking an ear. He said she would decide for herself. He said Christmas morning was not the time for strong-arming a woman in the street. The sharp-eyed man smiled thinly and said no one was forcing anything. He said words had weight and promises carried obligations. She felt caught between them, a rope pulled from both ends. She thought of the letters in her bag, of the careful handwriting. She thought of the night she had stood outside the window with no supper. She said she would listen, but not hear. She said she would not be spoken for without being spoken to. They moved inside the livery office, away from the eyes and the snow. The room smelled of ink and leather. The sharp-eyed man took off his gloves and set them down, neat and deliberate. He said the household had expected her, that circumstances had delayed the meeting. He said the man she was to marry had been called away on business that could not wait. He said a woman's patience was often tested in new places. She asked why no message had reached her. He said roads were unreliable in winter. He said not everything went through as planned. His words slid around the truth without touching it. She asked what would happen if she refused to go. He paused then, just long enough for the question to matter. The cowboy watched, saying nothing. She felt his presence like a wall at her back. The sharp-eyed man said refusal would be unfortunate. He said the town remembered such things. He said a woman alone had limited choices, especially one who had arrived under particular circumstances. She felt anger rise, hot and sudden. She said she had worked that morning, that she was willing to work again. She said she would not be moved like a piece on a board. The man sighed and said no one wanted trouble. He said he would return later, when emotions had cooled. He gathered his gloves and left, the door closing softly behind him. The room seemed smaller after that. The cowboy let out a slow breath. He asked if she was all right. She nodded, though her hands shook. He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She drank, focusing on the simple act. He said the man had no right to threaten her. He said towns had rules, but they were made by people, and people could be wronged. She asked him why he had spoken up. He shrugged, then said Christmas Eve had a way of reminding him who he wanted to be. He said he had seen too many folks pushed into corners. He said he did not like the look of that man's smile. They stepped back into the street together. The snow fell heavier now, softening edges, muffling sound. She felt the town pressing in, every door a question. He asked if she wanted to stay at the spare room again. She hesitated, then said yes, for now. She needed time to think. He nodded, as if that answer mattered. That afternoon, word spread. She felt it in the glances, the murmurs that stopped when she passed. Some looks held sympathy, others suspicion. A woman arrived as a mail-order bride was a story the town could not resist. Stories grew teeth when repeated. At the livery, the owner looked at her with concern and said the room was hers another night. He said no one would trouble her there. She thanked him and went upstairs. She sat on the bed and opened her bag, untied the ribbon at last. She read the letters again, searching for cracks she had missed. There were phrases that now seemed careful to the point of hiding. There was talk of expectations, of order. There was affection, but it felt distant, like something observed rather than felt. Downstairs, the cowboy spoke with the owner in low tones. He asked about the household on the north end of town. The owner's mouth tightened. He said they were respected, but not loved. He said the man she was meant to marry was steady, but not kind. He said a woman would be fed and housed, but the house had rules that did not bend. As evening came, the snow eased. Lanterns flickered on again, lighting the street in gold. She came down to help with chores, needing movement to quiet her thoughts. The cowboy showed her how to bank the stove, how to keep the draft just right. Their hands brushed once, brief and accidental. She felt it like a spark and pulled back, unsettled by how much it mattered. They ate a simple supper together, bread and stew. It was quiet, companionable. He told her about the range beyond town, about winters that could break a man if he was careless. He said he worked where he was needed, moved on when the land told him to. She told him about the place she had left, about a river that froze so hard you could hear it crack at night. They shared pieces without laying everything bare. Later, a knock came at the door. The owner opened it to find a woman wrapped in a fine shawl, her face pinched with worry. She said she came on behalf of the household. She said she wished to speak with the bride privately, woman to woman. She said there had been mistakes, and mistakes could be mended quietly. The cowboy looked at her, waiting. She felt the weight of the choice again. She said she would speak, but not alone. The woman's lips pressed together. She said it was improper. She said this was not how things were done. She said the town would talk. She said the town was already talking. She said she would not be cornered. After a long moment, the woman agreed. They sat at the small table. The woman spoke of duty, of stability. She spoke of a house that needed a steady hand, of a man who valued order. She spoke of gratitude, of how a woman could rise if she accepted her place. She listened, her chest tight. She asked about affection, about partnership. The woman waved a hand, dismissing it as something that came later, if at all. She said love was a luxury. She said security was the real gift. When the woman left, the room felt colder. The cowboy said nothing, but his jaw was set. She went upstairs and lay awake, listening to the sounds of the town settling for the night. She thought of security and its price. She thought of kindness and how quickly it could turn costly. Morning brought grey light and more snow. The sharp-eyed man returned, this time with papers. He said it was time to make things official, to avoid further trouble. He said delays only made matters worse. He said the household expected her answer today. She felt the pressure closing in, the way the road had narrowed without her noticing. She asked for time, just a little. He said time was a thing she did not have. He glanced at the cowboy, his eyes calculating. He said interference would not be forgotten. The cowboy stepped forward then, his voice calm but firm. He said threats would not speed things along. He said the town had laws, and a woman could not be compelled. The man smiled again, that same thin smile. He said laws were flexible, depending on who you were. As the day wore on, the town split into quiet camps. Some said she should take the offer and be done with it. Others said a woman deserved a say. The air grew thick with opinion. She felt herself becoming a symbol rather than a person. She walked to the edge of town that evening, needing space. The snow stretched out, unbroken. The cowboy followed at a distance, giving her room. She stopped and turned. She asked him why he stayed. He said because leaving would be easier, and he was tired of easy. She told him she was afraid. He said fear was honest. He said it did not have to decide for her. They stood there, the wind pulling at their coats, the town lights behind them. Somewhere a bell rang again, not for a service, but as a warning of weather coming in. She knew the choice she faced would shape more than her own life. She knew kindness could be a beginning or a complication. As snow began to fall harder, she wondered which promise would claim her first, the one written in ink or the one shared over a plate on Christmas Eve. The storm arrived before nightfall, rolling in low and heavy. The sky pressed down like a lid. Snow fell thick and fast, erasing tracks as soon as they were made. The town closed in on itself, shutters drawn, lamps turned low. It felt like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting to see which way things would break. She stayed close to the livery that evening, helping where she could, keeping her hands busy. Stillness made her thoughts too loud. Every sound outside made her look up, expecting another knock, another demand dressed up as courtesy. The offer from the North End house hung over her like a shadow. Security, order, roof that came with rules and a life already shaped. The cowboy came and went, checking on the animals, hauling feed, speaking little. When their eyes met, there was understanding there, and something else she was afraid to name. She reminded herself that kindness did not always last. The road had taught her that. As darkness settled, the sharp-eyed man did not return, but his absence felt like pressure instead of relief. The owner muttered that weather like this made people impatient. He said trouble liked to arrive when folks were tired and ready to give in. She wrapped her coat tighter and nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in her bones. But that night, she dreamed of standing at a crossroads, buried in snow. One path led to a house with bright windows and locked doors. The other led into open dark. When she awoke, her heart was racing. The room was cold, the stove low. She dressed quickly, as if movement could chase the dream away. Morning brought no clearing. The storm deepened, wind howling through gaps in the boards. Town life slowed to a crawl. She went downstairs and found the cowboy already there, feeding the horses. He looked tired, lines deeper around his eyes. He said storms like this could trap people for days. He said decisions made in storms were rarely clean. Before she could answer, shouting rose from outside. Voices carried sharp through the wind. She stepped to the door and saw two men arguing near the street, one pointing toward the livery. Neighbors watched from doorways, faces tight. The sharp-eyed man pushed through the snow, his coat dusted white, his patience gone. He said the delay had gone on long enough. He said the household would not wait out the storm while their affairs remained unsettled. He said arrangements had been made with the town council, and they expected cooperation. His words were louder now, meant to carry it. The cowboy stepped forward, planting his feet. He said the storm made travel unsafe. He said the matter could wait until roads cleared. The man laughed, short and humorless. He said unsafe roads were a small price for order. He said a woman's place was decided by agreement, not weather. People gathered closer, drawn by conflict like heat. She felt their eyes, felt herself shrinking under their weight. She spoke up, her voice cutting through the noise. She said she had not agreed to anything yet. She said she would not be taken through a storm like cargo. The man's face hardened. He said she misunderstood how things worked here. He said protection came with obedience. He said refusing would have consequences that followed her long after the snow melted. The cowboy said enough. His voice was low, but it carried. He said threats proved nothing but weakness. He said if anyone tried to force her, they would answer for it. The air felt ready to snap. An older man stepped out from the crowd, his beard white with frost. He said this was not how their town handled things. He said Christmas had just passed, and mercy should not be so quickly forgotten. Others murmured agreement, though not loudly. Fear ran alongside kindness, always had. The sharp-eyed man looked around, measuring the mood. He said this was not over. He said storms ended, and memory was long. He turned and left, his boots crunching away, the crowd slowly dispersing. Inside, the livery felt warmer, though the stove had not changed. She leaned against the wall, suddenly weak. The cowboy asked if she was hurt. She shook her head. He handed her a cup of water. Their hands brushed again, lingering this time. Neither pulled away right away. She asked him why he risked angering powerful people for her. He looked down at his boots, then back up. He said he had once watched someone he cared about choose security over kindness, and it had hollowed them out. He said he would not stand by and watch it happen again. The words settled heavy between them. She felt seen in a way that scared her. Caring meant loss was possible. She had come west to escape grief, not invite a new kind. As the storm raged, they worked together to keep things running. Hours blurred. Outside, the town huddled, each household facing the weather alone. Inside, something quieter took shape, built of shared glances and unspoken trust. That night, a rider arrived, half frozen, bringing news from the edge of town. The roads north were blocked, trees down, travel impossible for at least a day, maybe more. The owner nodded grimly. The delay felt like a gift and a warning, both. Later, as she lay awake, she heard footsteps on the stairs. A knock followed, hesitant. She opened the door to find the cowboy, his hat in his hands. He said there were rumors. He said the household planned to move fast once the storm broke. He said he did not know how far they would go. She asked him what he was suggesting. He took a breath. He said there were other towns, other chances. He said the road could be cruel, but it could also be wide. He said if she chose to leave, he could help her reach the next place safely. The offer hung between them, heavy as the snow on the roof. Leaving meant starting over again, carrying her past with her. Staying meant standing her ground in a town that might turn against her. She thanked him and said she needed time. Morning came dim and cold. The storm eased, but the damage was done. The town felt changed, edges sharper. The sharpened man did not appear, but his absence felt temporary. She sensed eyes on her whenever she stepped outside. She went to the church, drawn by habit more than faith. It was quiet inside, candles burning low. She sat in a back pew and let the silence wash over her. She thought of letters and promises, of meals shared and choices offered. She thought of what it meant to belong. When she returned to the livery, a wagon stood outside, its sides high, horses restless. The sharp-eyed man stood beside it, speaking to the owner. Papers were in his hand again. He saw her and smiled, slow and certain. He said the roads south were clearing. He said it was time. The cowboy moved to her side without a word. The owner looked torn, caught between favor and fear. The town watched from behind windows and doorways, unwilling to step into the open again. She felt the moment narrowing, the way a knot tightens before it slips or breaks. Her heart pounded, not with panic now, but resolve taking shape. She stepped forward, her voice clear despite the cold. She said she would make her choice openly, where everyone could hear. She said no more private rooms, no more whispered threats. The sharp-eyed man frowned, but nodded, confident. He said, "Speak then." The wind picked up, tugging at coats and skirts. Snow creaked underfoot. She looked at the cowboy, then at the gathered faces. She felt the weight of the town, the pull of the road, the promise of a different life balanced on a breath. As she opened her mouth to speak, the church bell rang, loud and sudden, echoing through the street. Heads turned, the sound rolled over them, filling the space, delaying the words that would change everything. She drew in a breath, knowing that once she spoke, there would be no turning back. The bell's final echo faded into the cold air, leaving a quiet that felt heavier than the storm had. She stood there, breath steady, heart loud, and spoke before doubt could find its way back in. She said she had come west by letter, believing in honest words and fair dealing. She said she had crossed miles of land to keep her promise, and she would not have it twisted into a chain. She said she would choose her own future as plainly and openly as anyone else in town. The sharp-eyed man stepped forward, papers raised, his voice ready with rehearsed calm. She stopped him with a raised hand. She said the letters spoke of agreement, not surrender. She said no vows had been made, no signatures placed before a witness. She said the law required consent, and she was giving none. Murmurs ran through the gathered crowd, small at first, then steadier, as people nodded and shifted. An older woman spoke from a doorway, saying the girl had a right to be heard. A shopkeeper added that storms delayed more than travel, and fairness mattered more than speed. The owner of the livery cleared his throat and said he would stand by what was right. The sharp-eyed man looked around and saw the balance tipping. His confidence thinned. He gathered his papers, said he would take the matter up elsewhere, and turned away from the wagon. The horses snorted as he led them off, the wheels crunching slowly out of sight. The street loosened its grip. People drifted back to their homes, conversation low and thoughtful. She stood where she was, feeling the cold on her cheeks and the warmth in her chest. The cowboy remained beside her, not touching, but close enough that she felt anchored. He asked if she was all right. She nodded, surprised to find tears on her lashes. She laughed softly at herself and wiped them away with her sleeve. But in the days that followed, the storm broke fully. Snow softened under a pale sun, and the town breathed again. She took work at the hotel, steady now, mornings full of clatter and steam. The cook grumbled, but paid fair, and by the end of the week she trusted her hands to the rhythm. People greeted her by name, some offered kindness with a smile. Others kept their distance, unsure. She learned that belonging came in pieces. The letters went back into her bag, tied once more with the faded ribbon. She did not throw them away. They were part of her road, and she honored that. But she stopped reading them. The future did not live there anymore. The cowboy came by often, sometimes with news from the range, sometimes just to share coffee. They spoke of small things and larger ones. He told her about the places he had loved and lost, about the quiet satisfaction of honest work. She told him about the river of her childhood, about learning to mend and make do. They laughed more easily now. The tension that had held them apart eased into something warmer. One afternoon, a child fell on the icy street, and she and the cowboy reached him at the same time. They helped him up, brushing snow from his coat. The boy grinned and ran off. She caught the cowboy watching her with a look that made her pause. It was not hunger or haste, it was recognition. She felt it too, like a door opening without a push. When spring hinted at its return, the town changed again. Mud replaced ice. The river swelled. Work picked up. She saved her coins carefully, proud of the weight of them in her pocket. The spare room above the livery became familiar, then temporary. She wanted a place that was hers. The cowboy mentioned a small house near the edge of town, empty since last fall. The roof needed mending. The stove smoked, but the windows faced the morning. They went to look together. Dust lay thick, and the floor creaked, but the space felt honest. She stood in the doorway and imagined a table, a lamp, a life built one piece at a time. They worked on it when they could. He fixed the roof. She scrubbed and painted. Neighbors stopped by with tools and advice. The town watched, then helped. One evening, as the sun dipped low, they sat on the steps, hands tired, shoulders touching. She leaned her head back and laughed at nothing in particular. He joined her, the sound easy. He did not rush what came next. He asked simply if she wanted to stay to make a home there, not out of obligation, but choice. She felt the question settle into her bones. She said yes, not to him alone, but to the life they were shaping. They agreed to take things at a pace that felt right, to let trust grow where fear once lived. Word traveled, as it always did. The sharp-eyed man did not return. The household on the north end found another arrangement. The town moved on, as towns do. What lingered was the story of a woman who had stood her ground and a cowboy who had shared his plate on Christmas Eve. Summer came. The house filled with light. She planted herbs by the door. He built shelves. They learned each other's silences. When disagreements came, they faced them with the same openness that had brought them together. There was work and worry, laughter and long evenings when the wind carried the smell of grass and rain. But on a clear morning, with the town gathered in quiet celebration, they made their promises, not rushed, not forced, spoken plainly, with witnesses who smiled and nodded. She wore a simple dress she had sewn herself. He wore his best hat. When they shared bread afterward, she thought of that first plate on Christmas Eve and felt gratitude swell. As the years turned, the house became a home known for warmth. Travelers stopped for water and a kind word. The table was often full. She remembered hunger, and it guided her hand. He remembered loss, and it taught him patience. Together, they found a steady joy. Sometimes on winter nights, snow would fall just so, and she would stand by the window, watching the street glow. He would come up behind her, quiet as always, and wrap her in his coat. She would think of the road that had brought her there, the fear and the courage, the choice made in the open air. She would smile, knowing she had kept her promise at last, not to a letter, but to herself. And in that small town, on the edge of the prairie, the story settled into memory as something worth telling. Not because it was grand, but because it was true. A poor mail-order bride found her supper shared, her voice heard, and her future chosen. On Christmas Eve, kindness opened a door. The rest they built together, one honest day at a time.